In your opinion, what difference will recent political events such as the Scottish independence referendum of 2014 and the vote to leave the EU, how will these political events affect the relationship between Poland and Scotland, and also sort of bearing in mind the historical relationship between the two countries? Does the history of the breakup of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth possibly provide any positive guidance as to how the future relationship between England and Scotland will develop in a productive and beneficial manner?
If I might take the last question first, I think there are some interesting features of the relationship of Poland and Lithuania after the breakup of the Polish-Lithuanian Union that perhaps act as a warning as to what can happen when partners in a union dissolve the union. As I said earlier, the Polish-Lithuanian Union was not dissolved by consent. It was dissolved by an act of force, the three partitions of Poland-Lithuania between the 1770s and the 1790s, against the consent of its citizens, just at the point when the American and the French revolutions declared that the people are sovereign, the nation is sovereign, which gives you the problem of defining who the nation is. Now, in the course of the 19th century, the old elites of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth struggled to restore it in its borders. They regarded the partitions as an act of force that was illegitimate in international law. There were many people in Britain who felt the same. Edmund Burke was one of the most famous. And that Poland-Lithuania should be restored to the map. But as the 19th century went on and nationalist forces gathered, suddenly these elites discovered that not all of the people felt the same way, particularly in what had been the original Grand Duchy of Lithuania, so the Ruthenians and the Lithuanians. Because by the time of the partitions, by the 19th century, the elites of Lithuania, the Lithuanians, spoke Polish. And so they regarded themselves as Lithuanians, although they spoke Polish, just as I regard myself as a Scot, but I'm speaking to you in English, not Scots or Gaelic. Thus, famously, the most famous poem in the Polish language, written by Poland's national poet, Adam Mickiewicz, begins with the line, "Lithuania, my fatherland," because Mickiewicz was a Lithuanian, not a Pole. He happened to speak Polish. In fact, he's the only poet I know who's the national poet of three separate nations, the Poles, the Lithuanians, and the Belarusians, all of whom have statues to him in their cities. And that raises the issue of identity. Another modern Polish poet, Czesław Miłosz, was born in Lithuania. He was brought up in Lithuania. He regarded himself as a Lithuanian. He ended up in Poland and then in America, writing his poetry in Polish and regarding himself as a Pole. His uncle, Oskar Miłosz, decided he was a Lithuanian and went as part of the Lithuanian delegation to the Treaty of Versailles. It divided families. And suddenly these Polish-speaking Lithuanians were forced to choose. Do I become a Lithuanian and learn Lithuanian, which I don't know? Or do I become a Pole? I don't feel myself as a Pole. And in fact, Poland, Lithuania, the Polish and Lithuanian delegations to the Treaty of Versailles, the Lithuanian delegation, most of whom had been or many of whom had been at school with some of the Polish delegation, who were from Lithuania too, the Lithuanians refused to speak Polish, so the two delegations spoke to each other, when they spoke at all, in bad French, which is ludicrous. But the Lithuanians were making a point. We are Lithuanians, we regard Poles as cultural oppressors. They fought a war over Vilnius, Vilnius, which is the capital of the old Grand Duchy of Lithuania, but most of whose, a great proportion of whose population spoke Polish and regarded themselves as Poles in a sense when it came down to it. And the two states did not have diplomatic relations between the war. So there's a dreadful warning. You can end up fighting each other when you separate if exclusive nationalist forces taken over. I'm not saying that I think this would happen if Scotland and England went their separate ways. The situation is very, very different. But it is an issue old friends who have got together can fall apart. Unions are difficult things. Part of the interesting feature of unions is that they institutionalize separate identities. The Union of 1707 guaranteed Scotland would have a separate education system, it would keep its separate legal system, it would keep its separate church. So that to this day, magically, Her Majesty, who is the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, when she crosses the Tweed, transmogrifies into a Presbyterian who goes to Crathy Church and has Presbyterian chaplains. A remarkably pragmatic union solution to a real problem. But Scottish identity was not eclipsed by the Union. Whereas Poles and Lithuanians had an experience of Russians who came in and Russified and banned the use of the Polish language or the Lithuanian language in institutions of education, and who attempted to make everybody speak Russian, which was resisted. That's a very different model. That's an empire, not a union. So there are warnings about how, just because you have been on relatively friendly terms in a political union for a long time, it doesn't mean you're going to end up as friends if that political union ends. Scottish independence, I don't think, would affect relations at all in any sense. And I know there are numbers of the Polish community in Scotland who voted for independence in the 2014 referendum. Brexit's a different matter, because the whole position of Poles within Scotland, Poles who have come here, who have settled here, whose children have gone to Scottish schools and are being brought up to speak Scottish. Migrant children often integrate very, very quickly. And the thought of going back to Poland for some of these families is deeply wrenching. So who knows what sort of Brexit we're going to get, but that will affect Polish families living in Britain far more, I think, than questions of Scottish independence. But then I am no expert on 21st century political matters.
Well, I think that quite neatly rounds things up, and if I can just say to you, thank you very much for your time and your extensive answers to my questions. I hope that people who watch this interview later will find it as interesting as I have.
Well, thank you for asking the questions.